Hello and welcome to my workshop. Today we're going to be starting a new project. That's going to be a 1951 Ford F-150. This is going to be a complete build. I'm really excited, so let's get started. I'm starting off this build by recycling some of my older molds. I made a Ford COE before, and the F-150 shares a lot of the body panels. Essentially, I'm able to use the cab, grille, and front fascia. The fenders and the hood will need to be made from new molds. I discovered a new way to put these together by watching Scott Limpert put one of my kits together. When I first started, I made an inner structure to attach the outer panels. I did this to add additional strength. However, I now see I can just add small patch panels across the joint and greatly reduce the weight. The end result is just as strong. I can't just use the cab as made for the COE. The lower portion needs to be removed, along with some sanding. Before I removed the banding, I glued in some styrene shapes and backfilled it in with CA glue. This gives a solid base to grind back to before filling with glazing filler. The grill, which is probably the best part of this truck, is a nightmare to pull out of the mold. I have done enough of these, including ones I destroyed, to have a pretty good technique now. I carefully remove material right back up to the edge of the mold. Then I shoot a quick shot of shop air in to help separate. Another trick I picked up from Adam Savage is applying baby powder to the mold before you do the vacuum forming. When I bought the container, all they had was lavender. So now my shop smells like a baby changing room, minus the poop smell. The cab on the COE is raised up and the fenders are pushed way into the door. In order to make it look like an F-150, extensions were added in the lower front of the door. Some of it will be covered up with the fenders, but it's better to finish this off before attaching the fenders. The front fascia, which holds the grille, gets attached to the new fenders and the original center section. I try to leave cues to where the material needs to get removed. Even with that, sanding, filing, and grinding is still required to make the sections line up correctly. It's also important to take a step back, literally, and look at the pieces from time to time. It's very easy to get a twist or get a panel out of square. As Jimmy DiResta says, if it looks straight, it is straight. Trust your eyes and gut. It's often far more accurate than any tape measure. As you can see, the front section, including the fenders, is built separate from the cab. I use paper to trace out the angle the cab makes at the bottom before transferring it over to the fenders. A small portion of the fender below the cab was left so it can later be tied into the running boards. This is a very tricky part and takes both careful measurements as well as visually checking to see if it looks correct. There are a few body lines which make good reference to check that the fender is not too far in one direction or the other. Since most of the panels are compound curves, any reference point is a blessing. I want the solvent glue to be the primary means for holding the fender. so the glaze filler needs to be sanded all the way back to the plastic where the fender meets the cab. Even though much of the parts are similar to the COE, the hood is quite different. I glued several pieces of MDF together as the base for carving out this shape. The first step is to make markings directly on the body. This gives visual cues that the part is correct. I make similar markings on the MDF. I can then move the block on and off the truck and make sure it gets back into the same spot every time. I picked up this flexible rule a few months back. Before, I was using a ruler and trying to hold the shape with one hand while marking with the other. The flexible ruler can be shaped and then flipped to the other side to get that same shape. I used a bandsaw to remove most of the material before starting the sanding process. Just like the body, I like to make marks directly on the mold. I will sand to the line each side and sculpt between the two. Most of the time this works well to get the mold into a general shape. In the past, I made raised parts, like the center of the hood or side, by removing material. I switched to adding in styrene, and I'm getting much better results. Often the styrene cracks while bending the shape, but I can add in glue and sand it back no problem. What I end up with is a mold that is part MDF, styrene, CA, and glaze filler. It doesn't really matter how ugly a mold is, as long as it gets the correct result. I spent a lot of time dialing in the hood mold. I don't have any plans for making this hood open, but I figured I might build one in the future that does have an opening hood. It is easy to force the part into place with glue, but much harder to make it line up if it's hinged. The windows were marked, but I waited until more of the body was complete before cutting them out. I just cut away close to the line and then used a rotary tool to go back right to the line. I don't want the seams to have any weakening due to material removal. Plus it's much easier and more consistent to cut the panel lines in styrene than any fillers. In order to get the panel lines, I use a Tamiya scribe tool. It has a carbide tip and comes in a few widths. You simply drag it along the plastic and it scrapes up small amounts of the plastic. Most of the time there is no issue removing a little bit, but if it's already thin, I will back it with more styrene or some kind of other filler. The bed on this just starts off as a box. It's very simple, but care needs to be taken to make sure that all the panels are square and straight. Often I take measurements from the drawing, but where possible, using a cut-out shape offers a much easier and more accurate cut. Here I am taking the rear fender to mark where the cut lines will go on the bed sides. There are inner and outer fenders, and their sizes are dramatically different. I believe the inner fenders are custom made or off another vehicle. The rear of the truck has super wide tires and needs these oversized wheel wells. Order of operation is important when working on these builds. Here I am making a complicated cut on the bench before gluing the piece to the bed. It can be done afterwards, but it's much simpler to get done before. Another thing that makes this bed a little easier is how many things are shaved. The original bed has all kinds of protrusions and pieces that need to be accounted for. This one has most of those smoothed out, which makes it a lot simpler. The sides that taper up are cut from separate pieces. I thought about making a mold for the bend, but it's just so quick to make it, I haven't gotten around to it.
push me back and forth again. One balloon is getting high, waiting for this hit to arrive. I'll secure my flight.
The end of the angle pieces get capped off with a section of styrene rod. Like other things, this has been smoothed in, so I'm able to add a little extra strength with a small piece of quarter round and some CA glue. All this gets sanded back and prepped for a thin layer of Tamiya filler. The last pieces to make for the body are the fenders and inner wheel wells. These are made just like the other molds, starting with MDF and adding styrene as fillers as needed. I also mark the position of the fenders on the body and offset the line a few millimeters in. Then small holes were drilled so I can insert the head of a push pin later on to give the look of a bolt, which would be holding on the fender. This shows up as a bolt pattern on the inside of the bed and matches up really nicely. This build is really coming along nice. It's fun to reuse my old molds, but even more fun to be able to change them into something else. There are so many cool projects coming up, and I'm super excited to get to them all. Until then, I'll see you in the rocks.